At 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I silenced a billion-dollar merger conversation to answer an unknown number. On the other end, a little girl was sobbing that her sister was bleeding on the sidewalk. If it were you, would you walk out of that boardroom and run toward a stranger's emergency? I did. And I'll tell you right now, it wasn't heroism or instinct or some polished CEO playbook. It was a voice, tiny shaking, that said, "Mister, please help me." She said her name was Zoe 7 3/4, like that fraction made her braver, older, more capable. "We're on Maple Street by the bakery. With the pink sign," she rushed out, "and Amara won't wake up, and people keep walking by." People kept walking by. That part landed like a punch. I stepped out of the glass and chrome boardroom, ignored a dozen eyes narrowing at me, and said into the phone, "I'm coming right now. Stay with your sister. Don't leave her side." I don't answer unknown numbers. Not usually. Not ever. But I did, and everything after that would split my life into before and after. You know what I mean. I remember the elevator ride like a movie. That trapped feeling, the seconds dragging, the kind of silence that roars in your ear. My driver pulled up and I told him Maple Street. Floor it. I called 911 with one hand and kept Zoe talking with the other. Kids do two things in a crisis. They tell you way too much or they go quiet. Zoe talked. She told me about her math homework, how her sister always holds her hand in the crosswalk, how their Aunt Simone works at a hospital on the other side of town, and how she doesn't cry much except when she thinks no one can see. Then Zoe whispered like a secret she could bargain with. "Are you really coming? Adults say promises and then don't." I said I promise. And I meant it with a kind of certainty I hadn't used for anything but contracts. The bakery's pink sign flashed into view, cheerful, and so completely wrong for the scene on the sidewalk. Amara lay on the concrete, dark hair matted with blood, a backpack half unzipped, the world tilted. A crowd had collected, not helpers, watchers. Zoe was kneeling there, tiny in her uniform, holding Amara's hand and telling her to count by fives, because counting makes the world behave. I slid in beside them, checked her breathing like a script I barely remembered, felt a shallow rise against my palm. Sirens. Relief. Then adrenaline again. The paramedics spoke in quick, clipped phrases. TBI, possible pupils, unequal pressure. And asked about a guardian, about consent, about insurance. I heard myself say, "I'll take responsibility. Move." They looked at my suit, glanced at each other, shrugged into motion. In the ambulance, Zoe grabbed my sleeve like a lifeline. "Thank you for answering," she said. "That's it. Not thank you for being rich or important or anything else. Thank you for answering. City General's ER is where the world pulls off its mask. No glass conference tables, no mahogany, just fluorescent lights, scuffed floors, and 1,000 kinds of pain moving in every direction. The head of the unit, Dr. Torres' sharp eyes that missed nothing, took one look at Amara and called a neurosurgeon. Possible brain bleed. Page Dr. Hassan. Prep OR. Zoe's lip trembled. "They're saying big words," she whispered. "Is that good or bad?" I said. "It's good. Big words mean experts, and experts mean help." A nurse asked if I was family. My mouth opened and nothing came out. "He's our friend," Zoe answered for me like that made it true. In that moment it did. They needed a guardian to sign for surgery. I asked Zoe for Aunt Simone's number, sprinted calls while they wheeled Amara away, and finally reached her. "This is Dr. Baptiste," she said, voice tired but steady. I told her everything I knew in 20 seconds. She told me not to let them do anything until she arrived. With respect, I said she doesn't have 10 minutes. We argued in that polite way professionals do when fear is chewing through the lining. In the end, I signed the forms, took full financial responsibility, and the doors swallowed her gurney like a mouth. Then the waiting started. If you've ever sat in a surgical waiting room, you know the sound of time changing shape. It stretches, thins, then snaps back. Zoe lined French fries into groups of 5 on a napkin and taught me to count them her sister's way. See 5, 10, 15, 20. It helps me be brave, while I stared at a clock that didn't move. When Simone burst through the doors, still in scrubs, I braced for anger. Instead, she pulled Zoe into her arms, then turned to me and said, "Mr. Cross, like my name was an equation she needed to solve." "I'm Nathan," I said. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and sat down hard like the day had finally landed on her shoulders. We waited. We talked. Tiny details you only share in a crisis when the filter comes off. How Zoe likes purple, how Amara skipped a grade, and sometimes feels too young in a room full of older kids. How Simone works double shifts because life is a bill that keeps refilling itself. I told her about my company, and it sounded like a resume I didn't recognize. When Dr. Hassan came out, everyone stood. "We stopped the bleeding," he said. Pressure relieved. Next 48 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Words like a gentle hand unclenching your chest. Simone's knees buckled, and I steadied her, surprised by the way it felt like permission. We took turns in the ICU. Machines hummed like a strange orchestra. Amara looked smaller in that bed, bandages wrapping her head like a crown she never asked to wear. Zoe climbed carefully onto the visitor chair, took her sister's hand, and said, "I found us help." Then she pointed at me. "He promised." Simone glanced at me with that unspoken question. "Who are you really?" And I realized I didn't have a good answer yet, only an honest one, the guy who answered. We slept in chairs that turned into almost beds and learned the choreography of hospital nights. Beeps, whispers, footsteps, silence. Around midnight, Zoe woke from a nightmare. "Will you stay until she wakes up?" she asked. "I'll stay as long as you need me to," I said. In the morning, Amara was awake, her eyes focusing, confused and sharp all at once. "Zoe said you paid for my surgery," she whispered, voice like paper. Why, I told her the truth, because sometimes a stranger becomes yours the moment they need you. That could have been the end of my part in their story. Pay the bill, send flowers, check in, once returned to my life. That's the neat version. But the neat version never happened. I started showing up. At physical therapy appointments with bagels, with a book about scholarships for Amara, with picture books about counting for Zoe. We went to the Science Museum. Zoe explained the solar system with wild hand gestures, and a staffer told me I had a budding astrophysicist on my hands. Amara stopped at a car safety display and said, "Plain as truth, I'm going to engineer safer cars one day." You ever hear a teenager say something with that kind of spine and think, "Oh, there's the future"? If it were you, would you invest everything you had to protect that spark? Here's something I didn't say right away. I also went behind the scenes. I paid the rent directly to their landlord because winter was coming, and the heat in that building wheezed like an old man. I moved some strings and got the girls' scholarships to a better school district. I set up college funds because I didn't want Amara choosing between tuition and groceries 4 years from now. I did it quietly because Simone wears pride like armor. Of course she found out. She confronted me in their small living room, hands shaking but chin high. "Did you pay a year of our rent?" "Yes." "The scholarships?" "Yes." "College funds?" "Yes." I waited for the door to slam. Instead, she cried. I'm not angry, she said, wiping her face with the heel of her hand. I haven't slept through the night in 2 years. I thought the next bill would be the one we couldn't pay. I told her I didn't want anything from them. She said, "That's not how the world works." I said, "It can be." Then we stood in a silence that felt like a doorway and stepped through it. We became a weird little team. Spaghetti on Thursday nights, museum on Sundays, flashcards at the kitchen table. I learned how to braid hair badly and drive in silence when a teenager doesn't want to talk, but still wants you there. Simone and I circled each other for a while, both of us careful, both of us tired of careful. One night after Zoe went to bed, and Amara had her nose buried in an essay, Simone said, "I don't understand why you're doing this." I said, "Because it's right." And when she laughed, not a mocking laugh, the surprised kind, I realized I wanted to hear that sound again. We kissed soft and unsure. Yeah, that happened. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. The twist showed up in the least dramatic place, a conference room printer. The detective on Amara's case finally found camera footage from the bakery's alley. Grainy video, a plate number a match. The car belonged to a logistics firm tied to one of my company's biggest partners. Then the second punch, the driver was the partner's executive son, the kind of kid who never hears the word no. My legal team, who tracks storms before I feel the rain, came to my office with that look. "We can make this go away," one of them said carefully. "There's a settlement path, NDA's, a donation to the clinic, quiet support for the family. The partnership stays intact, the stock doesn't flinch, and no one gets dragged through a trial." He said dragged like it was the worst thing that could happen to rich people. I looked out my window at a city that had always felt like mine, and realized I was about to find out who I really was. Do you think that's fair? A girl takes a hit for her kid's sister, and the person responsible gets a non-disclosure agreement and a new car. I brought the file home. Simone read it once, then again, then put her hand flat on the table like she could steady the room. "If you go after them, you'll break your company's favorite toy," she said. "If you don't, you'll break us." She didn't mean break us apart, she meant break the thing we were making together. A life where the right thing wasn't for sale. I took the file back to my board. Half the room wanted blood, half wanted dividends. All of them wanted me to be the kind of leader who never let feelings touch the bottom line. I told them I was going to the police with everything. The room went quiet, like I'd fired a gun into the ceiling. Calls were made. Threats dressed up as advice arrived in careful words. A board member pulled me aside and said, "Don't let one wrong number ruin your legacy." I told him that wrong number was the only part of my legacy that was ever going to matter. It got ugly. The partner threatened to pull the stock, dipped, the press circled. My team brought me statements to sign that apologized for my emotional response. I didn't sign. I sat in a courtroom with Simone and Zoe and Amara and watched the kid who hit her look at the floor while a lawyer tried to turn a girl's blood into a scheduling issue. When the verdict came, guilty penalties stiff because he left the scene and because he'd done it before, I felt something settle. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment. Justice imperfect and late but real. I wish that were the end of the fallout. It wasn't. The board moved to replace me as CEO. They couched it in the language of refocusing and shareholder value. But everyone in that room and everyone who read the press release knew. I could have fought it. I owned enough, had enough allies. But I didn't. The day they voted me out, I went home, cooked spaghetti, and told the girls I'm going to have more time for your science fairs. Zoe cheered like she'd been waiting for that to happen all along. "You can come to the field trip to the planetarium," she said. "We need more chaperones." We took all the noise and turned it into something. I asked Simone, "What would you build if money wasn't the first or last word?" She didn't hesitate. "A free clinic with pediatric care, emergency triage, mental health, the works." We found a building in their old neighborhood, the kind of brick that has seen 3 lifetimes, and we gutted it and built something bright. We named it after her sister and brother-in-law, the Lisa and Thomas Baptiste Community Health Center, because legacies matter and theirs deserve to be spoken aloud. At the ribbon cutting, the mayor said nice things, the council members shook hands, the cameras flashed. Zoe and Amara cut the ribbon scissors too big in their small hands, and I swear I heard something unspool inside me and re-knit into a different shape. People sometimes ask when I propose to the girls. I always say the same thing. They proposed to me first, just not with a ring. They proposed the first night I stayed at the hospital, the first time Zoe fell asleep with her hand in mine, the first time Amara asked for help on an essay and didn't apologize for needing it. But there was a night later when I sat both of them down with cookies and tea and asked if I could be their dad in writing, not just in practice. Amara said, "You already are." Zoe said, "Only if we can still have spaghetti on Thursdays." We signed papers in front of a judge with kind eyes, and when she said, "Congratulations," I realized a courtroom could be the happiest room in a city. I asked Simone to marry me in the park near their old apartment. No big spectacle, just a bench, the sounds of a neighborhood that had taught us everything, and a ring I picked with Amara's practical taste in mind. Simone said yes, the way you say yes to water when you're thirsty. We married in the clinic garden with sunflowers and mismatched chairs, and a string quartet playing songs we loved because they sounded like hope. The guest list looked like the city. Nurses and patients, and the guy who makes the best empanadas on the corner, and my old business partner who cried and pretended it was allergies. During the reception, Mrs. Rodriguez stood up and said her kids hadn't seen a doctor in 2 years until the clinic opened, and now her oldest was starting pre-med. She looked at Simone like a lighthouse, and at me like a person who had finally found the right ocean. 5 years spun out faster than anyone planned. The clinic turned into 3, the way one good idea turns into a movement when people trust it. Simone finished her pediatric emergency fellowship and started publishing work about how care can be community-shaped instead of crisis-shaped. Amara walked across the stage at MIT Cap, tilted crooked, because Zoe had used it as a prop the night before to explain gravity. We took a photo. Me, Simone, Amara, Zoe. And you could see every midnight, every laugh, every hard choice stitched into our faces. On the drive home, Zoe, now 12 and taller than her years, said, "Dad, I think I know what I want to be." What I asked, ready to hear astronaut or pianist or everything all at once. "Someone who helps people who need help," she said, simple as a math problem, with only one right answer. If you're still with me, here's the part people argue about. The ending. It isn't a neat bow. Because as much as I love where we are, I can't stop thinking about the moments that made it possible and what they say about us. A 7-year-old had to call a stranger because adults were stepping around a bleeding girl like she was an inconvenience. A hospital had forms for who pays and who authorizes because that's how we organize care, by wallet and signature. A wealthy partner's lawyer tried to turn a hit and run into a paperwork issue. And me, a man with more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, bought access and speed and a better outcome. Do you think that's fair? Really think about it. If Zoe had dialed any other number, yours maybe, would her sister be here laughing in a cap and gown? If your kid were the one on the sidewalk and a rich stranger didn't walk by, would the system hold you the same way? Some nights I lie awake and replay the scene outside the bakery. Not because I want a different ending, but because I want a different beginning. A beginning where the first passerby stops, where the ambulance comes just as fast for every name, where a boardroom doesn't have the power to make justice a rounding error. We built the clinic because we wanted to change our corner of the map. But maps are big and corners are many. So here's my invitation, and it isn't only to the wealthy or the well-connected. Answer the call. Maybe it's a phone ringing at 3:47 p.m. Maybe it's a neighbor's knock. Maybe it's a headline you can't ignore. Answer it. Show up. Put your hand on the problem and say, me, I'll take responsibility. The paperwork will be ugly, the room will go quiet, and people will warn you about consequences. Do it anyway. I still don't answer unknown numbers. Except sometimes when the line flashes and the hour feels like an old memory, I do. I can't help it. Because the best mistake I ever made was picking up a call that wasn't meant for me and discovering it was exactly mine. And if you're wondering about legacy, let me save you some time. It isn't a wing with your name on it or a stock chart that spikes. It's a kid who counts French fries by fives on a napkin and decides to be an engineer because you believed in her. It's a 12-year-old who asks if you'll chaperone the planetarium trip and doesn't care that your old board called you reckless. It's spaghetti on Thursdays and a clinic lobby full of people who call you by your first name because you belong to the same place. So tell me, if you were me, would you have blown up a partnership and lost your job to put a careless driver in front of a judge? Would you have signed papers to be a father to 2 girls whose last name didn't match yours yet? Would you have poured millions into a clinic that doesn't send bills? Do you think that's fair? Or do you think fairness is the wrong word, and we need a new one? Something like courage or neighbor or enough. Drop your thoughts below. Argue with me, agree with me, tell me the time you answered a call you didn't have to, and everything changed. And if you've ever been on the sidewalk and felt the world step around you, I especially want to hear your story. Don't just like and move on. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that the right stranger can become family, that justice can beat a spreadsheet, that one small voice can redirect a life. Subscribe if this hit you, because the next story might be the call you've been waiting to answer. At 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, I walked out of a boardroom to answer an unknown number. On the other end, a child's voice was shaking so hard I could hear her breathing more than her words. If it were you, would you hang up on a billion-dollar deal to save a stranger's kid? I did. Not because I'm noble. Because she said, Mr., please help me, and it cut straight through every polished thing I pretend to be. She said her name was Zoe, 7 3/4, with the kind of seriousness only kids have when they want to be taken seriously. My sister won't wake up. There's blood. People keep walking. I can't find my aunt's number. I tried to call 911 and I hit you instead. Then a hiccup, the kind that happens when a child runs out of air and courage at the same time. I said, "Slow down, sweetheart. Tell me where you are." She told me Maple Street, the bakery, with the pink sign, a detail so bright and cheerful, it felt cruel inside the panic. I told her I was on my way. I promised. Adults make promises they don't keep. That's a sentence you can feel in your teeth. Elevator. Lobby. Curb. My driver looked at my face and didn't ask a single question. We cut through the city like it owed us a lane. I put 911 on speaker and kept Zoe talking, because talking keeps people from falling apart. She told me her sister's name was Amara. She told me Amara always holds her hand at crosswalks and checks both ways twice, not once, because twice is safer. She told me their aunt works at a hospital, that sometimes she cries in the bathroom and comes out smiling, because that's what strong people do. Are you really coming? She asked, quiet like a secret she was afraid to say out loud. I'm really coming, I said, and to my own surprise I meant it with the kind of certainty I used to reserve for contracts. The bakery's pink sign popped into view like a wrong punchline. A small crowd, the kind that gathers to witness but not to help. On the pavement, a teenage girl with beautiful dark hair and a pool of red that looked impossibly bright against the gray. And next to her, a tiny kid in a uniform, knees on concrete fingers, laced through her sister's hand like she could anchor her to the world. I slid in, felt Amara's breath against my palm, shallow but there. Sirens. The relief was immediate and then gone. Paramedics formed their language around us, short words, fast hands. Guardian consent, insurance. I said I'll take responsibility, and they looked at my suit and stopped asking questions that didn't matter. In the ambulance, Zoe clutched my jacket sleeve like it was a rope thrown from a boat. Thank you for answering, she said, simple as truth. City General caught us bright lights and scuffed floors, and the sound of 10 kinds of pain moving in every direction. Dr. Torres took one look at Amara and called for a neurosurgeon. Possible brain bleed. We need Hassan. Prep an OR. Zoe tugged my sleeve and whispered, They're saying big words. Is that good or bad? I said good. Big words mean people who know what they're doing. A nurse asked if I was family. My mouth opened, then closed. He's our friend, Zoe said, like she was giving me a name. In that moment, it was enough. They needed a guardian. I asked for Aunt Simone's number, got it from the only person who had it memorized, and made the call while they wheeled Amara toward double doors that swallow people whole. Simone answered like a doctor who had not slept in 2 days and still had more to give. I explained in 30 seconds. Don't let them do anything until I get there, she said. With respect, I said she doesn't have 10 minutes. We did that polite professional fight that's really fear in a lab coat. I signed. The doors closed. Then we waited. You know the waiting room where time stops being linear and turns into a rubber band. You stretch, you snap back, you wait again. Zoe set French fries on a napkin and taught me to count by fives, because that's how Amara taught her to be brave. And when the math lined up, the world did too. When Simone burst through the doors in scrubs, I braced for a storm. She pulled Zoe in, held her like a person who had been holding everything for too long, then looked at me like I was a problem to solve, and a solution she didn't trust yet. I'm Nathan, I said. She nodded. We sat. Not together, not apart, just near enough to hear each other breathe. Dr. Hassan came out with the kind of face surgeons wear when they have good news but refuse to sell certainty. We stopped the bleeding pressure, relieved next 48 hours are critical. I'm cautiously optimistic. Simone's knees went soft, and I caught her elbow without thinking, and she let me, which surprised us both. ICU was machines and soft beeps, and the feeling that if you spoke too loudly, the room would crack. Amara looked smaller in a bed that seems designed to swallow people whole. Zoe climbed into the visitor chair and whispered, Hi. I found us help, he promised. Simone glanced over, measuring me against that word. Night folded in. We slept in chairs that try to be beds and fail. Around midnight, Zoe woke up from a nightmare and asked, Will you stay until she wakes up? I said. I'll stay as long as you need me to. If you've ever had someone promise you something at 1 a.m. under fluorescent lights, you know that's a contract more binding than ink. At dawn, Amara opened her eyes, focused, confused, present. Zoe says you paid for my surgery, she said, voice barely there. Why, I told her because sometimes a stranger picks up a phone and the stranger is you, and that makes them not a stranger anymore. If this were a tidy story, that would be my exit. Pay the bill, send a bouquet, feel like a good person, go back to the boardroom. That's not what happened. I started showing up. Physical therapy and bagels. A book about scholarships for Amara because the way she looked at the world told me she was already planning to change it. A stack of math picture books for Zoe because counting by fives deserves sequels. We went to the Science Museum on a Sunday. Zoe explained the solar system to me with both hands. A staffer leaned over and said, "You've got a real one on your hands." At a car safety exhibit, Amara said, like she was stating the weather, "I'm going to design safer cars." You hear a teenager talk like that. And if you've got anything worth giving you, start measuring it differently. If it were you, would you bet on that kid with everything you had? Here's what I didn't tell Simone at first. I called their landlord and paid the rent ahead because winter in that building sounded like a coin flip. I spoke to a headmaster and created scholarships for 2 girls who deserved teachers who had time. I set up college funds because if you can remove a cliff from a kid's map, you should. I did it quietly. Pride is a uniform some people can't afford to take off. Of course she found out. Strong women always do. She stood in the living room and asked straight questions. Did you pay our rent? The scholarships, yes. College funds, yes. I thought she would push me out, draw a line, say no more. Instead, she cried the kind of cry that sounds like someone laying down a backpack full of bricks. I haven't slept through the night in 2 years, she said. I thought the next bill would be the one that tipped us. I told her I didn't want anything from them. That's not how the world works, she said. It can be, I said. We stood there between the reality most people live in and the reality we wanted to build, and we stepped into the second one together. We became a team without signing papers for it. Spaghetti on Thursdays because Zoe declared it law. Flashcards and essay drafts at the kitchen table. I learned to be quiet when a teenager needed silence more than advice. Simone and I circled careful. One night after Zoe had drifted to sleep and Amara had retreated behind headphones, Simone asked, "Why are you really doing this?" I said. "Because it's right." She laughed without meaning to, and it sounded like a door unlocking. We kissed. Not fireworks, not music swelling, just relief. Yeah, that happened. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. The twist arrived in a manila folder that smelled like printer ink. A detective had found footage from a camera behind the bakery. Grainy, but enough for a plate, enough for a name. The car belonged to a logistics company tied to one of my largest partners. The driver wasn't a stranger. He was the partner's executive son. I didn't feel shock. I felt the sick predictability of a world that writes the rules in golf club dining rooms. My legal team, excellent at preventing pain for people like me, came in with solutions. We can handle this, they said, which is a phrase that means we can bury this. A settlement. NDA's a donation that looks generous in a press release, support for the family, without the mess of trial. The partnership stays. The stock holds. No one gets dragged through discovery. Dragged as if justice is an undertow. Do you think that's fair? Be honest. A girl throws her body between a car and her sister, and the person behind the wheel buys quiet with dad's money. Fair or familiar? I brought the folder home and put it on the kitchen table. Simone read it once, twice. She flattened her palm against the wood like she needed to feel something solid. If you go after them, you'll break your company's favorite toy, she said. If you don't, you'll break us. She didn't mean the romance. She meant the thing we were trying to teach these kids about what matters. I took the folder to my board. Half the room spoke the language of risk, half the room spoke the dialect of fear. All of them looked at me like I'd lost track of the scoreboard. I told them I was taking everything to the police. The silence that followed had edges. A board member put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't let one wrong number ruin your legacy." I told him that wrong number was the first true sentence in my legacy. It got loud, then quiet, then loud again. The partner threatened to pull. The stock dropped a little. Reporters called. My PR team brought me statements to read that sounded like I was sorry for letting my heart near the bottom line. I didn't read them. We sat through a trial that sanded everyone down. The defense tried to turn a hit and run into a scheduling accident. The driver couldn't look at the witnesses. The prosecutor said something simple about duty and consequence. The jury did not take long. Guilty, not triumph. Alignment. I looked at Zoe and saw what belief looks like when it finally has something to stand on. "You want the price tag?" "Fine." The board replaced me. They wrapped it in phrases like shareholder confidence and strategic direction, and I could have fought and probably won because money buys not just comfort, but leverage. I let it go. The day I cleared out my corner office, the city looked the same and felt completely different. I went home, stirred spaghetti sauce, and told the girls, "I'm going to have more time for your lives now." Zoe pumped her fist like she'd been rooting for that outcome from the beginning. "You can chaperone our planetarium trip," she said, absolutely certain this was an upgrade. We turned loss into a blueprint. "What would you build if money wasn't the first and last word?" I asked Simone. She didn't blink. "A clinic where cost doesn't decide whether a child gets help. Pediatric care. Emergency triage. Mental health. Vaccines. Prenatal. No bills at the end." We found a building with brick that had seen a century. We named it after her sister and brother-in-law, the Lisa and Thomas Baptiste Community Health Center, because names matter and grief can be turned into shelter. On opening day, the mayor read a speech. The cameras clicked. But the only thing I remember is Zoe and Amara cutting a ribbon with scissors too big for their hands, and a line of families waiting not for charity, but for care. There was a night with cookies and tea when I asked the girls a question I had been carrying around like a fragile object. "Can I be your dad?" "Officially," I said. Palms sweating in a way they never did in acquisitions. Amara said, "You already are," which is the kind of sentence that repairs a person from the inside out. Zoe said, "Only if we keep spaghetti on Thursdays." We stood in a courtroom with a judge who had kind eyes, and we signed our names, and the four of us walked out into sunlight that felt like it had been saving itself for that moment. I asked Simone to marry me on a park bench near their old apartment, because that's where we learned who we were. No flash mob, no drone footage. Just the two of us and a ring picked with Amara's exacting standards and Zoe's desire for sparkle. Simone said yes, like a person choosing water in the desert. We married in the clinic garden with sunflowers and a string quartet because elegance doesn't need chandeliers. A woman named Mrs. Rodriguez stood up at the reception and said her kids hadn't seen a doctor in 2 years before the clinic opened, and now her oldest was starting pre-med, and it felt like a door opened between what we hoped and what was true. 5 years is a strange unit of time. It swims by when you fill it. We went from 1 clinic to 3. Simone finished her pediatric emergency fellowship and began publishing work about how care can be a neighborhood and not just a building. Amara walked across a stage at MIT and took her diploma with a steady hand. Zoe Taller now teaches me things I thought I knew and didn't. We have a photo of that graduation. If you look closely, you can see every hard choice stitched into the edges of our smiles. If you're still listening, here's where people start arguing in the comments. The ending isn't a bow, it's a question. Because as much as I love where we landed, I can't stop replaying the beginning. A child had to call a stranger because grown adults stepped around a bleeding girl. An emergency room worked the way emergency rooms have to work, with forms and signatures and definitions of family that do not always match reality. A wealthy partner thought he could buy silence for a son who should have learned consequence before he learned how to floor a car. And me, a man who could buy speed and access, did. Do you think that's fair, or do you think fairness is the wrong word? And what we really mean when we say fair is convenient for the people already holding the cards. Some nights I lie there and rewatch that alley, not because I want a different outcome, but because I want a world where the first passerby stops where ambulances arrive fast, no matter what name is on the intake form, where a boardroom cannot treat justice like line item volatility. We built a clinic because revolutions are made of addresses, not slogans. But addresses multiply. So here's my ask, and it isn't just for people with money. Answer the call. Maybe it's a phone at 3:47 p.m. Maybe it's a neighbor knocking. Maybe it's a headline that feels like a dare. Answer it. Show up. Put your hand on the problem and say, I'll take responsibility. People will warn you about consequences. They will tell you about fallout. Do it anyway. I still don't answer every unknown number. I'm not pretending to be a saint. But sometimes when a line flashes and the hour hits that muscle memory I pick up, I can't help it. The best mistake I ever made was answering a call that wasn't meant for me and finding out it was exactly mine. And if you're wondering about legacy, save yourself some empty rooms and engraved plaques. It's not a wing with your name on it. It's a kid who counts French fries by fives on a napkin and decides to engineer a safer world because someone believed she could. It's spaghetti on Thursdays and a clinic lobby where people call you by your first name because you belong to the same place. It's a courtroom where a judge looks at your family and says, "Congratulations," and you believe her. So I'll put it to you. If you were me, would you have blown up a partnership and lost your job to put a careless driver in front of a judge? Would you have signed papers to become a father to two girls whose last name didn't match yours yet? Would you pour millions into a clinic that never sends a bill? Do you think that's fair? Or do you think justice is supposed to cost something, and the cost is exactly what makes it real? Tell me in the comments. Argue with me. Agree with me. Tell me about the time you answered a call you could have ignored and what it changed. And if you've ever been the one on the sidewalk, if you've ever watched people step around you and thought, maybe no one sees you, I especially want to hear from you. Don't just like this and move on. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that the right stranger can become family, that spreadsheets do not get the last word, that one small voice can reroute a life. Subscribe if this hit you, because the next story might be the call you've been waiting your whole life to answer.